It all went silent when the video started playing, not the nervous coughs or the rustle of papers, but a deep, ringing silence that swallowed the entire auditorium. My dissertation defense, 5 years of my life, had just evolved into a corporate espionage thriller. Dr. Alistair Finch, my advisor, was the first to react. His face, normally a polished mask of academic superiority, went pale, the color draining out like water from a sink. He was standing near the projector screen, his hands gripping the edges of the podium. His knuckles were white. He had just finished tearing into my methodology, calling my core findings premature and fundamentally flawed. He loved using words like that. Mrs. Chen, I must insist that you return to slide 24 and explain the derivation of your boundary conditions, he had sneered just seconds before. The committee members looked tired. They just wanted to sign the papers and go home. Then I said, with all due respect, Dr. Finch, I believe the boundary conditions are clear, but perhaps we need further context regarding the ownership of this work. I clicked the wireless presenter button. I wasn't advancing a slide. I was initiating a preloaded hidden video file on the university's main server. The gigantic screen behind Finch flickered, then showed an image of his office, taken 3 weeks ago. Finch started to stutter. Lena, what is this? The audio was crisp, too loud for the small room. It was Finch's own voice, recorded during a private conversation with a venture capital lawyer. Finch sounding smug. Yes, I know. Lena's a bright student, but the core algorithm, that's my intellectual property. She was nearly executing my long-term strategy. We hold the keys. Her defense is next week that she won't pass it yet. I need another 3 months to finalize the patent application under my name. Definitely, love, death. She needs more refinement. No, she won't suspect a thing. Finch physically recoiled from the screen as his own voice betrayed him. He looked like he'd been hit by a car. He tried to lunge for the keyboard, but my friend Leo was already sitting at the controls in the back row. He locked the screen immediately. The committee chair, Dr. Hemlock, an external expert known for his strict ethics, slowly removed his reading glasses. He didn't look at me. He only looked at Finch. His expression was pure, cold fury. Finch stammered, This is doctored. This is libel. Lena, you will be expelled. I just leaned into the microphone. I spoke clearly, softly, and clinically, like the scientist I am. Dr. Finch, the file is timestamped, server verified, and cross-referenced with your department calendar. You had a meeting with Mr. Robert Hayes at 10:30 a.m. on October 12th. I believe the committee needs to review the remaining 12 minutes of this footage before making any further decisions. The room went completely silent again. I watched Finch deflate. He knew it was over. But let me back up. The lab was my entire life for 5 years. That is not a metaphor. My social life died the day I started my PhD in computational materials science. I focused on synthesizing a new kind of polymer. It could revolutionize battery life. People think chemistry is boring. They are wrong. It is relentless, grinding work. It is thousands of failed simulations. It is sleepless nights where the only sound is the hum of server racks. My name is Lena Chen. I do not look like a revolutionary. I look like a girl who orders the most basic coffee. I wear the same beat-up fleece jacket every day. But inside my head, the mechanism was constantly running. I was constantly optimizing the process. My breakthrough happened in year 4. I did not find the perfect polymer. I found the perfect algorithm. It could predict the failure points of any polymer. It was an impossible shortcut. It could save the industry billions of dollars. I remember the exact moment, 3:17 a.m. The terminal screen was glowing green. The simulation that should have taken 3 months was finished in 48 hours. I did not jump or scream. I felt a deep, cold certainty. I knew I had cracked the code. This algorithm was my ticket. It was my intellectual property. It was the future of my career. The next morning, I brought the data to Dr. Alistair Finch. Dr. Finch was the head of the department. He was a local luminary. Everyone called him a visionary. I called him Dr. Finch, even when he asked me to use Alistair. He had that manicured, silver-haired look that screamed, I give a TED Talk. He was famous for discovering nothing himself, but mentoring dozens of successful postdocs. He leaned back in his leather chair. He barely glanced at the printout. Astounding, Lena, he said. His voice was smooth, like an oiled machine. Truly astounding. This is a major score. We will co-author the Nature paper, of course. This will define both of our careers. That phrase, both of our careers. It sounded generous then. He was an established star. I was a student. Of course he would be a co-author. I felt a rush of gratitude. I thought, this is how it works. The mentor lifts the student up. The gratitude did not last. He immediately started changing our workflow. He insisted we meet only in his office, never the lab. He told me to stop running the analysis scripts myself. Too much time wasted on coding, he said. He needed the raw log files, the original unprocessed data sets, every single one. Just the raw data, Lena. My team will cross-reference your results with past projects. It will streamline the process. I felt a slight prickle of worry. Why couldn't I do the cross-referencing? I built the whole system. But I waved the feeling away. It was Dr. Finch. He was the expert. I told myself I was just paranoid. The classic student mistake. I gave him everything he asked for, every line of code, every raw data file. I handed him the keys to the kingdom without thinking. That was my first mistake. This error quickly had consequences. Finch started giving me ambiguous instructions. He wanted me to pivot from computational work to physical polymer synthesis. This was a strange move. My strength was in coding and modeling. Physical chemistry required entirely different skills. I asked him why I needed to do this if the algorithm had already proven its efficiency. He replied that real scientists had to be able to work with gloves. It was a thinly veiled insult, a suggestion that my work was just coding. I complied. I spent the next 6 months in the lab, working with corrosive reagents. I synthesized the polymer, but with difficulty. Each time I brought him samples, he inspected them with an almost disgusted look. He said the samples were not pure enough or improperly crystallized, yet he demanded that I leave the samples in his office for his team's further analysis. He never allowed me to be present for this analysis. At the same time, he sent me to countless conferences unrelated to my work. He sent me to Europe for symposia on hydrodynamics when I should have been at the material science symposium. He paid for the trips but gave me the most ridiculous assignments. He wanted me to be as far away from campus as possible. I began to suspect these trips were simply a way to isolate me from my work. He wanted me occupied while he dug through my data. I started to feel like a cleaner tasked with mopping the floor in a building next door while the homeowner was taking furniture out of the house. Each time I returned, I found his attitude toward me grew more arrogant. He started publicly criticizing my presentation skills, calling them not energetic enough for a breakthrough study. He was setting the stage. He wanted to convince everyone, including me, that I was incapable of presenting this work on my own. I started working on a small shadow project on my personal laptop. It was a clean, reprocessed version of my algorithm that had no connection to the university servers. I knew I needed a backup if he decided to lock me out of the main work. This was my first act of academic disobedience. I began to fight the war on two fronts. Finch was not just restricting access to the data, he was methodically destroying my reputation in the department. He used a classic tactic, praise my diligence, then undermine my intellectual authority. When I applied for a prestigious fellowship, he wrote a letter of recommendation so ambiguous that I didn't even get an interview. I read that letter later when it accidentally came to me via an administrative assistant. He wrote, "Star. Lena is a diligent researcher who executes instructions with rare thoroughness. However, she lacks the spark of intuition that separates the scientist from the coder." He couldn't outright call me stupid, but he did everything to convince the committee that I was merely an executor, not the architect of the idea. I felt the nausea wash over me. My isolation became physical. Other PhD students started avoiding me. At first, I thought it was because I was too busy. But then I realized Finch had sown seeds of doubt. He implied to them that I was too difficult to collaborate with and that my project was falling apart. He even transferred my lab mate, whom I was friends with, to a different project, saying that Lena needs isolation to focus. I was completely alone. My only contact with the outside world was Leo, who was in a neighboring state, and my family, whom I didn't want to worry with my academic dramas. It was during this period that I started documenting not only his actions, but his words. I started carrying a voice recorder. It was hidden in a small keychain hanging on my backpack. I turned it on during all my meetings with Finch. This wasn't spying, it was self-defense. I knew that if the matter reached the ethics committee, it would be a student's word against a department head's word, and the student's word always loses. The recordings quickly piled up with evidence. He regularly talked about how we must control the narrative, and Lena doesn't understand the commercial value of her own discovery. Once he said, when you're teaching at a community college, Lena, you'll realize how important personal branding is. Your work is brilliant, yes, but my brand sells it. He said this with a wide smile, believing he was doing me a favor. I sat there nodding, but inside me a wall of cold, hard anger was rising. I started noticing financial oddities. Finch acquired a new Porsche. He renovated his mansion. This all happened after my algorithm started bringing in initial licensing royalties. He claimed these were university bonuses for successful curatorship. Curatorship? He didn't even know how to run my main script. At this moment, I finally understood that this was not just academic envy. This was a major, multi-million-dollar financial fraud, and I was a pawn. My revenge had to be as public and financially ruinous as his lie. My paranoia reached its peak when I found an old paper Finch had published decades ago. It was retracted due to unsubstantiated data. He had never recovered from that blow. This algorithm was his chance to rewrite his legacy, and he was willing to destroy me to secure it. The thought fueled me. I was dealing with a desperate man pretending to be a philanthropist. I stopped sleeping altogether. I started preparing my final presentation not as a defense, but as an indictment. The changes intensified after I submitted the first full draft of my thesis. Finch started doing what I now call the exclusion dance. He would schedule meetings with the dean about my research but forget to tell me until they were over. I would see emails between him and other department heads discussing the Finch algorithm, referring to my work. I started saving everything. He grew more protective of the core data. He put a physical lock on the drive that held the backups. He told me it was for security. He said the research was too sensitive for shared drives. He was right about the sensitivity, wrong about the ownership. I realized I was being subtly erased. I would catch him in the hallway, and he would introduce me to visiting dignitaries as a very promising coder, helping us refine the Finch model. He never said Dr. Chen, who created the model. My friend Leo, a network engineer I met years ago during an undergraduate coding competition, noticed the stress. He saw the red flags I was trying to ignore. Lena, he asked over a blurry FaceTime call one night, "Why is he asking you to sign an IP waiver?" Finch had included a new form in the defense paperwork. It was buried deep in a section about publication rights. It was a blanket waiver transferring all intellectual property rights associated with the PhD thesis to the university for expedited commercialization. Finch assured me it was standard procedure. He says it's normal. I told Leo, rubbing my temples. Leo scoffed. Normal for a company, maybe. Not for a PhD student who cracked the code for a multi-billion-dollar catalyst. He's trying to cut you out of the royalties, Lena. He's trying to make your research his property. The pressure to finish was immense. Finch kept pushing the defense date back. First, it was the committee is too busy. Then, the preliminary review suggests a few structural issues. He was stalling. I knew he was stalling. Every week he delayed meant he had more time to refine his patent application and publish his paper. I started working nights in the lab again, but now I was a ghost. I stopped telling Finch what I was doing. I was only simulating minor adjustments, distracting research paths. All the while, I was copying every email, every edited document, every version history onto an external, encrypted drive that Leo had configured for me. I felt sick all the time. The excitement of the breakthrough was replaced by the cold, metallic taste of betrayal. I was not paranoid. I was being robbed. systematically and professionally. I was going to lose 5 years of my life's work unless I fought back. The fight started with data collection. I became obsessed with documentation. I had to catch him in the act. The academic game was over. Now, it was a surveillance game. I needed proof that couldn't be dismissed as a student's fabrication. The final insult came in an email from the university registrar. My name was misspelled. My graduation date was listed as TBD. It wasn't a clerical error. It was Finch's hand, ensuring there was no paper trail confirming my status until his paper was safely published. I printed that email. I archived that email. Every small slight was a chip I was collecting. I realized that academic theft is not a single crime. It is 1,000 paper cuts designed to bleed you out slowly. I stopped seeing Finch as a professor. He was just an obstacle to be systematically removed. I looked at the hidden camera feed Leo had set up, and I practiced my presentation, imagining his face as I delivered the final, fatal slide. The breaking point was abrupt, sickening, and irreversible. It happened 4 days before the final defense date, the one Finch had grudgingly agreed to. I was in the lab at 11:30 p.m., printing out a stack of non-essential appendices. I was exhausted, running on 4 hours of sleep and instant noodles. I was in this state of almost animal existence when I saw the light under Finch's door. I was so tired I initially thought it was a hallucination. But it wasn't him. It was Kevin, his assistant. I watched him from behind a pillar. He was pale, and his hands were trembling. He clearly did not want to be there. Kevin was not just copying my work. He was arranging the paper into stacks. I saw him neatly bind the copies into 3 different covers. One was for the lawyers, a second for the patent office, and a third for his personal, private library. I saw on the title page that he hadn't even used my official title. He simply called it Preliminary Analysis Conducted Under the Direction of Dr. A. Finch. It was so humiliating, so offensive in its pettiness. He didn't even bother to keep up the illusion of respect. I quickly took out my phone and started filming. It was risky. The light from under the door could reflect off the screen, but I didn't care. My fingers, which usually moved with the precision of a surgeon when I was coding, were now frantically pressing the video record button. I filmed a wide shot of Kevin at the copier, then a close-up of the title page, and then, catching the moment Kevin turned away, I took a picture of an open page showing a unique segment of my code. That code was my signature. No one but me wrote it exactly that way. I stepped back, feeling cold sweat run down my spine. I left the building without saying bye-bye to anyone. My brain was working with terrifying efficiency. I realized I couldn't confront him in person. That would be suicide. I was not just robbed. My academic identity had been erased. I drove home, and my first thought was to post everything online, Reddit, Twitter, cause a public outcry. But Leo stopped me when I called his number. No, Lena, this is academic politics. If you publish it yourself, they will discredit you as an emotional student. They'll call it hacking. You'll give them the weapon. We have to use their own procedure, but turn it against them. His words were my anchor. He translated my chaos into a clear, logical plan. We wouldn't shout. We would whisper the truth. But at the most critical moment, Leo stressed the importance of chain of custody. We cannot modify the video. We cannot splice the audio. We have to present an unedited, time-stamped, server-verified event. That's what breaks institutional trust. My internal struggle ended. The human emotion, the desire to scream, was replaced by the cold logic of the scientist. This was my final experiment, and the variable I was testing was Finch's integrity. The hypothesis was that he had none, and the test was scheduled for my defense. Leo and I spent the next 3 days preparing, turning my small apartment into a command center. It felt more like preparing for an operation than a dissertation defense. AV, preparation. The hardest part was timing. My presentation file was a perfect duplicate of his file. I couldn't just run it from a flash drive. His defense was on the university server, locked down from external access. Leo had to gain remote access to the AV system controller in the auditorium. He used an old, abandoned port that the university had forgotten to close. We spent 2 nights rehearsing. Leo sat in the kitchen. I stood in the living room, simulating the podium. I would say, slide 24. And now, Dr. Finch, the context. And Leo had to switch the screen in 0.8 seconds. Any delay, and Finch would manage to kill the power. Welcome to Revel, Revel, Revel. Revel, Revel, Revel. Revel, 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 Revel. To act the provocation. To get the video of Finch and the lawyer. Section 1. I wrote him an email. I found that the new IP waiver affects not only commercial rights, but also my long-term publication rights. I cannot sign it without legal counsel. He panicked. I knew he would immediately call his lawyer to discuss how to silence me. That same day at 10:30 a.m., when he had his meeting scheduled with Mr. Hayes, I sat in my office listening to the audio stream Leo had set up via the hidden microphone in the bonsai. It was a terrible experience. I heard him laughing, discussing how they would bury my work under theirs. But it was there that he spoke the golden words. She is just an executor. The algorithm is my property. New active meticulous Goldstone. New active meticulous Kidness. We meticulously checked the external committee members. Dr. Hemlock, the chair, was known for one thing, his zero tolerance for academic theft. He was a stickler for process. He would ensure that any evidence presented would be handled by the letter of the law. I had to convince him that this was not a dispute, but a crime. I had Leo compile a confidential packet, a summary of the keystroke logs and the evidence of Finch delaying my defense, and had it physically delivered to Hemlock's office via courier just hours before the defense, titled, Urgent Academic Integrity Breach Regarding PhD Candidate Chen. I did not send the video, I only sent the suggestion that a breach was imminent. This ensured Hemlock arrived already suspicious. Plan B, we prepared a decoy flash drive. It contained no video. It held an encrypted, self-executing script that, when inserted into any computer in the auditorium, instantly sent all my evidence, including the voice recorder files and the copier photos, directly to the ethics department and Dr. Hemlock's email. This was the nuclear option. If Plan A, public humiliation, failed, I was ready to be expelled from the university, as long as Finch did not walk away unscathed. When the morning of the defense arrived, I felt no nerves. I felt peace. I knew I was in complete control of the situation. This was the final simulation, and all variables were accounted for. I put on my best, most severe suit. I was not just Lena Chand, a student. I was the scientist who was about to punish an academic thief. The defense started at 9 a.m. The room was cold. I felt the weight of the last 5 years crushing my chest. I started my presentation, detailing the catalyst, the simulation, and the predictive algorithm. I spoke flawlessly, confidently. I answered the initial questions from the junior faculty with ease. Finch was sitting in the middle, radiating hostility. He wasn't even pretending to be a mentor anymore. He waited until the committee chair, Dr. Hemlock, invited him to comment. Alistair, your thoughts on Miss Chen's conclusions? Hemlock asked, his voice neutral and slightly cautious. Finch adjusted his tie. He started his verbal demolition. The conclusions are enthusiastic. Mrs. Chen is a hard-working student, but this work is fundamentally premature. The central mathematical model relies on boundary conditions that are, frankly, ill-defined. We have serious doubts about its generalizability. I recommend a 6-month extension for further refinement under my continued supervision. It was the death blow. 6 months meant his paper would be published, and I would be an assistant on his project, not a PhD graduate. He finished, sitting back with a smirk, believing he had won. The committee looked uncomfortable. They trusted Finch's judgment. Dr. Hemlock looked at me. Miss Chen, your response to Dr. Finch's critique of your boundary conditions. I took a deep breath. This was it. I had to transition the presentation without making a spectacle of the switch itself. With all due respect, Dr. Finch, I believe the boundary conditions are clear. But perhaps we need further context regarding the ownership of this work. I clicked the presenter. Leo, in the back, executed the switch instantaneously. The title card of my presentation vanished. It was replaced by the recording of Finch's office. The audio was immediately loud. Finch's recorded voice. The core algorithm? That's my intellectual property. She was merely executing my long-term strategy. The real Finch went ballistic. He shouted, "This is an outrage! Turn it off! This is a violation of privacy!" He lunged for the laptop on the podium. Leo hit the remote screen lock. Dr. Hemlock didn't shout. He stood up slowly, a pillar of quiet authority. "Dr. Finch, you are advised to stop. This is now an official investigation. Miss Chen, do you have any other evidence relevant to the intellectual honesty of this defense?" "Yes, Dr. Hemlock," I said, my voice steady. The final 12 minutes of the recording detail his plan to publish the data under his name next week. Furthermore, I have provided evidence to your office of his systematic attempts to suppress my defense date. Hemlock looked at Finch, who was visibly shaking. "This defense is immediately suspended. Dr. Chen, you are dismissed. Dr. Finch, you are to remain." He turned to the other committee members. "Gentlemen, we have a serious issue of academic misconduct that must be addressed immediately." I gathered my papers and walked out of the auditorium. The sound of Finch's frantic, desperate protests echoed behind me. The defense started at 9 a.m. The room was cold. I felt the weight of the last 5 years crushing my chest. I started my presentation detailing the catalyst, the simulation, and the predictive algorithm. I spoke flawlessly, confidently. I answered the initial questions from the junior faculty with ease. Finch was sitting in the middle, radiating hostility. He wasn't even pretending to be a mentor anymore. He waited until the committee chair, Dr. Hemlock, invited him to comment. "Alistair, your thoughts on Miss Chen's conclusions?" Hemlock asked, his voice neutral and slightly cautious. Finch adjusted his tie. He started his verbal demolition. "The conclusions are enthusiastic. Mrs. Chen is a hardworking student, but this work is fundamentally premature. The central mathematical model relies on boundary conditions that are, frankly, ill-defined. We have serious doubts about its generalizability. I recommend a 6-month extension for further refinement under my continued supervision." It was the death blow. 6 months meant his paper would be published, and I would be an assistant on his project, not a PhD graduate. He finished, sitting back with a smirk, believing he had won. The committee looked uncomfortable. They trusted Finch's judgment. Dr. Hemlock looked at me. "Miss Chen, your response to Dr. Finch's critique of your boundary conditions?" I took a deep breath. This was it. I had to transition the presentation without making a spectacle of the switch itself. "With all due respect, Dr. Finch, I believe the boundary conditions are clear, but perhaps we need further context regarding the ownership of this work." I clicked the presenter. Leo, in the back, executed the switch instantaneously. The title card of my presentation vanished. It was replaced by the recording of Finch's office. The audio was immediately loud. Finch's recorded voice. "The core algorithm? That's my intellectual property. She was merely executing my long-term strategy." The real Finch went ballistic. He shouted, "This is an outrage! Turn it off! This is a violation of privacy!" He lunged for the laptop on the podium. Leo hit the remote screen lock. Dr. Hemlock didn't shout. He stood up slowly, a pillar of quiet authority. "Dr. Finch, you are advised to stop. This is now an official investigation. Ms. Chen, do you have any other evidence relevant to the intellectual honesty of this defense?" "Yes, Dr. Hemlock," I said, my voice steady. The final 12 minutes of the recording detail his plan to publish the data under his name next week. Furthermore, I have provided evidence to your office of his systematic attempts to suppress my defense date. Hemlock looked at Finch, who was visibly shaking. "This defense is immediately suspended. Dr. Chen, you are dismissed. Dr. Finch, you are to remain." He turned to the other committee members. "Gentlemen, we have a serious issue of academic misconduct that must be addressed immediately." I gathered my papers and walked out of the auditorium. The sound of Finch's frantic, desperate protests echoed behind me. I didn't wait for the official verdict. I walked straight to the nearest cafe, ordered a black coffee, and simply sat there, watching the rain outside. Leo joined me an hour later, looking drained but satisfied. "They're still in there," he said, sliding into the booth. "But the dean's office is already involved. They pulled the entire personnel file on Finch. Apparently, he had a few questionable co-authorships in his past. Your evidence just confirmed a pattern." The final consequences came quickly. The official review board determined that Finch had committed gross academic fraud attempted to steal intellectual property, and had been actively sabotaging my defense for personal gain. His career imploded. He was placed on immediate administrative leave, the polite academic way of saying fired, and his professorship was revoked. The university quietly initiated an internal review of all his former students' publications. My defense was rescheduled 2 weeks later. The committee included 3 new external members. Finch was, of course, absent. My thesis passed with unanimous distinction, and the committee chair, Hemlock, personally signed the papers that secured the IP rights entirely in my name. The university, eager to mitigate the scandal, offered me a generous research grant. I politely declined. 2 days after I officially became Dr. Lena Chin, I was packing up my small lab desk. Finch was there, lurking in the hallway. He looked terrible. His suit was rumpled, his hair unkempt. The silver-haired statesman was gone. "Lena, I want to apologize," he mumbled, avoiding my eyes. I stopped packing. I looked directly at him. I wasn't angry anymore, just clinical. "You aren't sorry you stole from me, Dr. Finch. You're sorry you got caught. You used me as a piece of hardware. You calculated your risk and you lost. I calculated mine and I won. That's the only difference. I picked up the box. The algorithm, by the way, has been successfully commercialized. I retained the majority of the IP. I will be joining the Max Planck Institute next year, working on the next generation of predictive models." I did not wait for his response. I walked past him, down the hall, and out the door for the last time. The air outside was cool and clean. The weight of 5 years was finally lifted. I never looked back. My research is saving the world billions. Finch is probably teaching at a community college in the middle of nowhere, or worse. I made my peace with the fact that my revenge was not shouting. My revenge was success. And I am just getting started.